One of the jokey things about entrepreneurs is that they're essentially unemployable. The world's media flocked around him because there's basically this zombie-looking man. I've probably listened to that over 100 times by the time I present. What we have here is a room full of Margarets.
On this week's Engaging Marketeer and BNI Education Slots combined post, we are going to be speaking to Greg Davies-Polaine. Greg is the executive director of a number of different regions of BNI in the UK. He is a host of the UK conference, and he is the host of the global BNI conference. And I got the privilege of watching Greg strut his stuff on the stage in Hawaii last year. Greg is an incredible public speaker. He's an incredible BNI member, and he is an exceptionally funny guy and a brilliant storyteller. So let's find out from Greg how he does what he does, why he does what he does, and what advice he's got for anyone else that wants to get themselves out there the way he has. So, Greg, you're obviously in BNI as a member, and your category is a bit of a strange one because your business within BNI is the storyteller, I believe, is what you call yourself. What exactly is the storyteller, and what the hell do you do?
Okay, so I just to be strive for clarity from the start, I'm not a member.
You're not actually a member. You're not even a member.
I'm not the most important people. No, I'm not a member. I'm a servant of members. So I'm an executive director. Right. I own a franchise for 2 regions, London, South East, Bromley and Croydon. They were one region when I came in. I joined as a member it'll be 20 years ago this coming February. So just in a matter of weeks' time. And I had a signage company. So I used to do vehicle graphics, banners, that kind of stuff. Mm. The storyteller is my public speaking persona. And I like to use stories to illustrate points and drive people towards finding the answers for themselves. I think whenever we're dealing with entrepreneurs, whenever we can use examples rather than just saying to people that they need to do things in a certain way, it leads people to the correct answers, and you get less friction. One of the jokey things about entrepreneurs is that they're essentially unemployable. And I know from my point of view, I wouldn't want to go and work for anyone again. And if you give an entrepreneur a system, the first thing they're going to try to do is shortcut that system. Mm-hmm. So if you, in a training capacity, in a presenting capacity, if you saying you have to go and do this, and you've got an audience of entrepreneurs, you can pretty much guarantee 99% of them are going, well, how can I find a shortcut around that? Whereas the very basic form of telling a story is these guys over here did this and had success. So just using peer-to-peer examples, it leads them to going, well, I'm going to decide to try that. And then it stops being you telling them to do something and it starts being their ideas. So the storyteller came about from a one-to-one with a member. My region is South East London. And even though I'm a bit of a mongrel in the UK, I was born in Lancashire, I was raised in Sussex. Both of my parents and grandparents came from my region. So it's a bit serendipitous that I've ended up back there. Mm. And the storyteller does sound a bit South East London geezerish. So
it does a little bit. Yeah. It's a storyteller.
Storyteller. Yeah. Kind of how the name came about. Huge testimony to my very first executive director when I joined, a gentleman called Andrew Hall. He was a brilliant storyteller. Could have a room hanging on his words. He is a very tall gentleman as well, so he had a very unique figure on stage. He would use his arms a lot to illustrate points, and watching him and watching how the audience reacted to his stories, I knew that's how I wanted to present. Mm. So that's how the storyteller came about. And I tend to weave stories wherever possible into education slots, feature presentations, training events, and ultimately my public speaking engagements. But I am under no illusion that everything I do outside of BNI, so any corporate training I do, any writing, any speaking, I'm only blessed enough and honored enough to be able to do that because of the success that the members have in my region. So it all tracks back to being involved in BNI. At no point do I think I'm going to be the next Jim Rohn or Simon Sinek. I just like and feel stupidly honored to do what I do right now.
But that's great that you say that. I mean, I've got a bigger ego than that. I do it because I just want to get on front of everyone. So what makes someone that runs a signage company say that I want to get up and I want to do talks in front of hundreds and thousands of people? Because the two biggest fears in the world are death and public speaking.
Yeah,
and some people have a bigger fear of public speaking than death. What made you want to do that?
Yeah, it's funny. I use that. That's a great example. I use that in my training as well. So I go to top 5, and so top 5 are fear of heights, fear of flying, fear of spiders, fear of death, fear of public speaking, and then lead on with the joke. So next time you're at the funeral, the majority of the people would rather be in the box than delivering the eulogy. Yeah. And it is just that, and we have to address this fear of public speaking, because essentially every single week at a BNI meeting, people are having to speak publicly. But the reason BNI works is because after week 1, you're presenting in front of friends. You stand up in front of a room of people that you know as a majority because you've seen them before, and it stops feeling like public speaking. I also recognize that the skill to do comes from the doing. And the more you do something, I'm not going to say easier, but the more comfortable it becomes. So public speaking is a skill. It's a learned ability, and it needs to be practiced. And it's why you see incredibly accomplished speakers using wonderful techniques like anchoring, moving to certain parts of the staging area to illustrate different parts of the timeline and all stuff like that. Those are learned skills. No one does that naturally. Yeah. So I saw the benefit of BNI very early on, both financially in terms of my return and personally in terms of the support that I got from members around me. So I naturally wanted to give back to my own chapter, then my own region, then the region that I ran, and then BNI as a whole. I still feel like I'm in a massive deficit with what I owe to BNI, considering what it did for me in those early years, and still continues to do for me. Like during the toughest moments of my life, it's always been BNI members that have rallied around me. And I've got a theory on that as well. BNI members are close enough to you, but not too close that it affects them personally. So when you go through a challenge or a bereavement, you are surrounded by friends and family that also have a relationship with, in the case of bereavement, those who have departed, whereas BNI members are close enough to you, but don't necessarily have that relationship with those around to have that personal impact, so they can focus on supporting you at the time that they need you. And it is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I experienced it and wanted to give back. So I started doing ed slots, and I stepped into a leadership role, helped the chapter grow. I'd love to say it was me, but grew, but incredible members around me. Then went and supported active groups, launched new groups. Launching new groups into new communities is just a wonderful thing to do. The second group I ever launched, a group called Achievers, is still going in Sussex. It celebrated its 15th year.
Wow.
A few years ago, and there were still members in the room that joined on day one. And that is a legacy that I don't think anyone in their life would start off planning to put in place. That kind of business, givers gain, community, legacy, which will perpetuate on, like we don't know how long chapters last. We've got average lifespans based on how long groups are going, but there are still original, the founders chapter in Southern California, one that Ivan started originally, is still going. So we don't know how long chapters will last. So, my goal is that some of the groups, it will never be all of them, but some of the groups that I launch will outlast me. And at no point do I ever assume that they'll remember the person who launched them. But the reason that they are there is because me or members of my team put a pin in a map and said, we're going to start a community here. And, that kind of stuff is really powerful. So as soon as I started actively trying to give back to my own group, public speaking kind of came as a development side effect of those roles. And I just found it easier to tell stories. So I remember doing a presentation at the first group I ever took over Platinum, which is a 50 plus member status. And it was Worthing. They're still going down in West Sussex. And I was working with them from when they were kind of mid-20s through to over 50. And we did it by running a succession of quite big visitor events. And there was a wonderful, wonderful member who joined on the first visitors event down there. And I did this kind of, you would have seen it, you've probably done an ed slot on it, but it's the formula that works out how many relationships there are in a room. So it's n squared minus n over 2, where n is the number of people in the room. So I had this flip chart and I was doing these little stick figures, and I'm like, hey, if you got 5 people in a room, it's 5 times 5, 25 minus 5, 20 divided by 2. There's 10 possible relationships. And then you'd scale it up to a chapter of 20, chapter of 30, chapter of 40, ultimately a chapter of 50, which is what our goal was. And I thought I was some kind of butch version of Carol Vorderman, flip chart figures, all that kind of stuff. And really successful Visitors Day. I think we joined 5 or 6 people. This wonderful member being one of them. I then went back about 2 or 3 months later to run another Visitors Day. And she came up to me in Open Network and it's like, it's lovely to see you again. You're here for Visitors Day? Yeah, I'm here for Visitors Day. And she said, you won't be doing that terrible thing with the flip chart again, will you? Because you've done that before. And of course, what everyone has said to me is, but it worked. You should have just done it. But I am a massive sufferer of imposter syndromes, and I constantly overanalyze and question. So what came out of my mouth was, oh, no, I've done that. Of course I'm not. And I then had this panic situation where I was basically getting up in front of a room of, I think, about 50 people when you had members and visitors there. And I had nothing in my back pocket. So I started thinking about, well, what is BNI? And I started relating it back to times in my life. And what I realized what BNI was what we use. It's a formalization of what we used to do 50 years ago and 100 years ago and 200 years ago, which is you had a very tight community. And if someone needed the shoes changed on their horse, you would send them to a specific farrier. And, I know Darren, he's brilliant. He's not going to rip you off. Go and see him. And there might have been 2 or 3 in the village, but Darren was my go-to. So I track that forward to my childhood. And I alluded to it earlier in the podcast, but my mum and dad were from Southeast London. My dad followed work up to Lancashire, where my brother and I were born, and then again followed work down to Sussex. So we did that thing where we bought the worst house on the best street in a town called Crawley. Now, Crawley was a new town. It's still classed as a new town, obviously. And I love Crawley. It gave me every opportunity that I ever needed in life, but because it was a new town, it had a bit of a bad reputation. So I always made a joke about, the worst house on the best street in Crawley means I had 2 burnt out cars and an abandoned fridge rather than 1 in my front garden. But I then led on to say that my mum and dad knew no one in Crawley at all. They had no established network. And I would tell the story of me playing football on the green opposite my house, using jumpers for goalposts, and the ball would go over the fence of a lady who lived next door. And I was always sent round to get this ball. And I would knock on the door and say, "Excuse me, Mrs. Elmers," and I'll do a very childish, high-pitched voice when I was doing it. Can I have my ball back? And she would say, she'd answer the door holding the collar of her Doberman, which was like a Velociraptor, this thing. And she would say, "You can have it back this time, but if it comes over again, I'm feeding it to the dog." And from the moment I started telling this story, people were nodding along. So I was like, you use jumpers for goalposts and all this kind of stuff. And when I said that there was like the matriarch of the street, and she would threaten to put a knife through the ball or feed it to a dog, everyone's going, yeah, I remember that. And then I'd get to the crux of the story, which was that the reason I always got the ball back was because Margaret and my mum were best friends. And I still remember Margaret's phone number to this day. I'm still connected with her on Facebook. Margaret was the person that we were told to call in an emergency. So I've memorized her phone number, and I made the mistake once of actually saying it, and someone said to me, "You do realize that is still her phone number?" So all that someone would have to do is marry the area code of Crawley together, and they'd be able to phone and speak to Margaret. And then I went on and said, Margaret lived in Crawley for decades. So whenever my mum's car broke down, he would say to my mum, go to this garage, don't go to that one, go to this one. And when our boiler broke down and our heating needed fixed, he would recommend the right plumber. And more than that, she'd pick up the phone, and Roger and Brendan were our plumbers. And I don't know what hold she had over them, but basically it was like, you need to look after my mate Jackie. And these guys would turn up, they'd do an incredible job, and more often than not, they'd charge us either way less than we were expecting, or that beautiful thing that happens where it's like, "Oh, don't worry, just give us a drink for it." It was just a switch on the side that needed to be done. But that happened time and time again. Like, when we had, as I said, the car, but even like down to the Pearl insurance guy who used to turn up at our house, that was someone recommended by Margaret. And then I'd make the joke that what we have here is a room full of Margarets. We have a room full of people that have years of experience in this local community. They've built up relationships. They know who to recommend. And right now there's gaps in their address book, and those gaps are in your category. And that's the story I told on the on that second Visitors Day. And it's still, not only is still the story that I tell at visitor events now, I've got a number of them. It's also the story that I encourage all directors in BNI to develop. Think back to your childhood. Think back to the person who was the go-to in your local community. And we've had the milkman, the postman, we've had people's fathers, we've had local religious leaders, scout leaders, person who run the football team. All of these incredible people. We had one of the directors down in Sussex. It was their nan, and their nan was the first to get a phone on the street, and everyone used to go and use her phone. And the condition was that they had to write down, if it was a tradesperson or someone useful, they'd have to write down the number. So she literally had this little book. I'd love it to be a black book. I don't know if it was. But of all these incredible numbers that people had used effectively. So that was like pre-qualified. So way better than the yellow pages. This was people that were actively responding in the local area. And as soon as we started using that, again, it's the power of telling stories. It's like you see people nodding along, and Darren, I would hazard a guess that I've just said that, and you're thinking, yeah, there was something like that when I was growing up. My mum and dad.
I am thinking that, yeah. I am thinking that.
And so if you're thinking, every visitor in that room, and then when you say, well, that's all we do here, that's what we do. We've just formalized that process. It's what we've always done in communities. We've always recommended people we know, we like, we trust. And all that BNI's done is, in a world where it's become far too high tech and not high touch, we've formalized the high touch process. So we formalize that relationship building and trust process, but we also recognize that we've got gaps, and that's why you've been invited here today. And I think, I suppose you could refer to that as a really well scripted sales pitch, but it doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like a line. It doesn't feel like, do you want the red car or the blue car? It doesn't feel like an alternate close. It is just, this is what we do and this is why we do it. And then when you back that up with some of the stories of support and success that you see in BNI regularly, it's such a powerful thing. So that's an incredible, you'll ask a story and then I'll circle. You'll ask a question and I'll end up circling back to it in like 20 minutes. But essentially, that's how I ended up public speaking, wanting to be a leader in my own chapter, give back because of what the chapter had given me. That then scaled out across the region. And then ultimately, it was my limiting beliefs and imposter syndrome that made me stumble upon the power of storytelling, and seeing people nod along when you're telling stories and engaging is just an incredible thing. So that's ultimately how I ended up there.
It's quite a rush, isn't it? It's quite a feeling when you've got people that are hanging on your every word. It's almost like a drug. Because I've done stand-up comedy, and when you got off the stage, the first thing you want to do is go back on again.
Yeah, it can be really addictive. And I was very, very lucky enough to be the MC at the Newcastle conference, not the one that's just happened, but a few years back. We're probably talking 2015, maybe. So just after I'd become an executive director. And I threw my hat in the ring for that. So one of my big tips is, if you want something, throw your hat in the ring. Just let people know that you're open to it.
If you don't ask, you don't get.
Exactly. And I was out at a global convention with Tim and Charlie Lawson, the national directors, and I said, how do you become the MC of the UK and Ireland conference? And at the time, it was a bit of a poison chalice. No one really wanted to do it. And the first person who did want to do it was Julian Lewis, and he did it for 2 years in a row. And I said, well, how'd you get that gig? I'd love to do it. And they're like, okay, we'll take you on board. And the next year, they offered it to me. And on the last session, after the last keynote speaker had spoke, I closed. And you shouldn't really do this as an MC, I now realize, but I didn't know it at the time. I closed by telling a story, and I told a story of John McKenzie, who was a marathon runner from Tanzania, who at the Mexico Olympics was one of the favorites, and he took a stumble very early on in the marathon. And he pulled himself to his feet, and he was bloody. He strapped his shoulder up, strapped his knee up. His knee was bleeding. And he basically finished the race limping. And he came into the stadium an hour after the medal ceremony. Luckily, there was still a medal ceremony going on for another event that had just finished. And the world's media flocked around him because there's basically this zombie-looking man coming into a now near deserted stadium. And he gets across the line, they put a thermal blanket around him, and the journalists kind of flock around him as his coach is leading him off. And at one point, one of the journalists says to him, why didn't you give up? Because, people that had suffered no injury at all dropped out of that marathon, and he finished it. And he just looks at the journalist and says, I wasn't sent 10,000 miles to start a race. I was sent 10,000 miles to finish it.
Wow.
And I then told that story, and then I said, I cannot wait to see how your journey finishes. But halfway through that story, I had a moment where I couldn't hear anything in the room. And I looked up and I thought again that, I'd done something wrong. And what I realized was every single pair of eyes was on me in that room and everyone was listening to every single word. And I had that kind of, oh dear moment. I need to pull this off. I hope this hits home.
You need to land it.
And it did hit home. It was an incredible story, and I was lucky enough to be the conduit of that story at that moment, and it had impact on people in that room. And again, as you said, yes, it's addictive. Yes, you get a massive flow of whatever the natural chemicals are that flow at that point. But another reinforcement of just how powerful stories can be. And it was a year after that, in Dublin, two things happened. I mainstaged solo for the first time. So I did my How Will You Feel in 30 Minutes speech, and I won ED of the Year for the first time. So I track it back to that's where it started. That's where the kind of, okay, this guy might be a little different. So yeah.
But you can't just get up onto a stage like that and start telling a story and have everybody eating at the palm of your hand. There requires an awful lot of training and practice and blood, sweat and tears to do that. You've mentioned alternate clothes, you mentioned stage anchoring, you've mentioned using positions on the stage for a timeline, so the move to stage left for the past, move to stage right for the future. You've clearly had a lot of training on this. So what training have you done, and who were your inspirations for it?
So I've had no formal public speaking training,
You're kidding.
Other than doing it a lot.
You're kidding.
No, not at all.
Wow.
But I've been lucky enough to see some incredible speakers. Whenever I'm in the car, I'm either listening to the Spotify playlist of the band that I drum in, because I tend to forget the order of songs, or I'm listening to an audiobook. And there was a guy called Ben Davis, who's a member, no relation, a member down in BNI Sussex when I was there. And I don't think it's his quote. Well, it's definitely not his quote, but he was the first that I heard say it, which is everything we want in life is kept on the top shelf, and you reach it by standing on the books that you read. So I either listen to my band's playlist or I'm listening to audiobooks. And by listening to audiobooks, I much prefer the writer to read out the audiobooks, but you get that kind of understanding of how to tell a story. And we are blessed in BNI. There are some incredible public speakers. There aren't many organizations that generate the amount of talent that we have, because there aren't many organizations that insist on people rehearsing public speaking regularly. Like if you go to some large corporate events, some of the speakers are absolutely dire. They're death by PowerPoint. Yeah. And that's because they're just not used to doing it. They're incredible at what they do, but they're told to present Q4's marketing target, and it is literally the most confusing situation in their life because they're not used to doing it. Whereas in BNI, we are blessed to have incredible speakers. I was also part of a network marketing company about 12 years ago, and went around the world and saw some incredible speakers. So Darren Hardy, the editor, owner of Success Magazine and The Compound Effect, Chris Gardner from A Pursuit of Happiness. We've had some brilliant speakers at BNI. I went to one of the action coaching events as a guest from BNI and saw Matthew Syed black box thinking, Michelle Mone, uh, and a few others, and I'm embarrassed I can't remember. So I've seen some very, very good ones. I also practice a lot. I research stories really heavily. I always say that the key of telling a good story is not the story; it's how you tell the story to fit the message that you want the audience to hear. Yeah. And there are stories that I tell which, there's one that's that opens the Infinite Legacy book that we've just published with Ivan, and it's about Alfred Nobel and him making a choice to change his legacy from
this book right here.
That one there, yeah. So that story that's in the front, I've been telling it at leadership team trainings for over a decade. And when we, after Infinite Giving, when we pitched the idea of Infinite Legacy to Ivan, I was like, I've got the perfect story. And it's powerful in that instance because there's a guy that has a certain self-image and he realizes the world doesn't see him like that. And he's got two choices. Does he cry himself to sleep on his, what would now be billions of pounds worth of money, or does he do something about it? And he changes the way that the world perceives him. He goes out and, puts together this fund and celebrates the best of human achievements with the Nobel Prize. And you can use it like that. You can absolutely use it like that. But there are other ways that you could use that story by telling it in different ways. And that's the same with most stories, like the John McKenzie one. That could just be about tenacity. It could be about not giving up, but it can also be about the weight of expectation of others and you being committed to others. And I'm sure there's 100 different ways you could tell that to fit different messages. And I think that's the real power of storytelling, because there are stories around us all day. Every single day we go out there and we could pick up stories. And I try to document stories, whether I use them or not, regularly. And then when I'm asked to speak and I have to come up with a new subject, or when we write books, I look back through the list of stories that have kind of been compiled over the last year, 2 years, and ones that I haven't used before, and see if I can make them fit the direction we're going in.
You mentioned death by PowerPoint earlier on, and I've seen a lot of talks at networking groups which are death by PowerPoint. Public speaking isn't easy for some people. Some people need visual prompts, some people need cue cards, some people need to read. What's your favorite technique or your preferred technique when you're going to go on a stage and deliver a talk or deliver a 10-minute talk? Do you write everything out and memorize it word for word? Do you use cue cards? Do you improvise a lot of it and just know the bare facts? How do you like to do it?
So a lot of my presentations have very detailed stories. Whenever I go into a subject deeper, they have figures, stats. The last one I did around teamwork had stuff about the happiness hormones in there. So some quite detailed biochemistry stuff. I can't improvise around that. I think the audience picks up when you're kind of winging it. So there's two things I do. So I'll print out multiple copies of the presentation, but very large text and just bullet points. I'll have a set on my lectern. I'll have a set front and center on the stage, and I'll have a set on the other side of the stage to where the lectern is, because the lectern's normally over to one side. So I tend to bounce around the stage a lot. So wherever I am, if I get stuck, and it's very rare I get stuck, but if I get stuck, I can look down and a bullet point will kind of, okay, that's where we are. So that's one of the things. But the only reason that works is because I rehearse. So I will, with my notes in front of me, open up a Zoom call just like this one, and I will record the presentation with me reading it verbatim from my notes. I then open up the recording, and there's a separate audio file. So I then got the audio file, and I then listened to the audio file of me, which is, I've got a terrible voice. I don't know how you're doing it. I'm like a budget Dale Winton. So me listening to my own voice is never a good thing. However, for a half an hour speech, I've probably listened to that over 100 times by the time I present it.
Really?
And multiple recordings as well. So I'll listen to it and listen to it and listen to it. And I'm like, I can do that better. That was wrong. The inflection was wrong. So I'll then record it again and listen to it again and then do it again. And even when I've presented it once, if I can get hold of the recording where I've done it live, I'll then re-listen to that one when I'm on my way to do it again. So I'm down in I'm lucky enough to be invited to regions to do members' days and stuff like that. And I'm been invited down to one. I'll be listening to the presentation. So even though I've done it multiple times, this one is called The Difference. It's about 4 things that I've seen consistently over 20 years in BNI. The difference between those that succeed and those that fail. Again, loads of stories. But I'll be listening to it time and time again because, as I said a while ago, public speaking is a skill, and it like all skills, you can get good at something, but then you get rusty. So, people are, you never forget to ride a bike. No, but your first time back on one in 20 years is really dicey. So if you're not doing something regularly, if you're not rehearsing that skill, you become rusty. It becomes clunky. It doesn't flow as well. So I also never take it lightly. I always get nervous. So before a feature presentation, before an ed slot in the chapter, I still have a little squeeze of adrenaline that rushes through. I'm a horrible person to live with before I do a keynote for the first time. And you cannot talk to me an hour before. And that's not a diva thing. That is me. And I've been really lucky enough where people have said, oh, but you're amazing. You're going to do a great job. Of course you are. You've done it so many times. But it's not that. It's not a doubt in abilities. I've been asked to deliver something because the organizers want me to make an impact. And I feel the weight of that responsibility. I want to deliver. It's not, at no point is it at no point is it a diva-ish thing. At no point is it I don't think I can tell a story. It is I want to make sure this is exactly what you want.
Well, that's actually perfectly normal, because I'm shocked to find you haven't had any speaker training because you are so good at it. But I've had speaker training, and what you've just described then is called getting in state. It is the important thing before you go out and do a talk that you mentally compose yourself ready to do it. And some of the advice you're given on this is not to check emails before you go out. Just lock yourself off for half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever it may be. Shut yourself from everybody else. Put headphones on if that's what you want to do. Listen to music, listen to your talk, go through your notes, whatever it is. But don't engage with people. Don't read emails, don't check the internet, because if you read something that puts you in a bad mood, it's going to completely affect your performance. Don't have a talk with your wife, because if she says something that's going to put you off, then it's just not going to work. So yeah, that's getting in state. That's perfectly normal. You're right. It's not diva-ish at all. It's standard.
Yeah, I've also been backstage and seen some very, very, I need to think of the right word for this, but
careful,
unpleasant speakers, those that don't treat those around them particularly nice. Really do exhibit diva-ish behaviors, not in BNI, talking external speakers.
Of course.
And the thing is, it's the first thing that people say about them when you know they forget the content, they forget. But you see, yeah, you know, demanding and just not very pleasant to work with, and I never want to be like that. So, I am very self-aware that I do kind of go into myself before I present, and I let those around me know that that's just, you know, just my the weight of wanting to deliver something good.
Well, that comes back to that famous quote that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget the way you made them feel.
I'm gonna say Maya Angelou for that one.
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, if those speakers were objectionable and you got the feeling from them that they weren't very pleasant and they didn't want to talk to you, then that's your overriding feeling of that. So what they said on the stage, what they did on the stage is completely irrelevant because that's the feeling you got from them and that's what they've left you with.
Yeah, I remember, and again, I mean, this shows the impact he had. I actually can't remember his name, but it was an external speaker, and as he was coming up on stage, his microphone wasn't on. He wanted a handheld mic, and his mic wasn't on, and he was kind of flicking this mic around and tapping it, and he looked over at the sound desk, and just the only way I can put it is with a snarl in his eyes, venom came out. And as soon as the mic was, because he was basically like, you know, where's my sound? He wanted to speak as he went up the stairs, but of course hadn't told anyone that. But it wasn't, you know, his fault. It was someone else's fault. And then when he went on stage, it was this big kind of, hey, how's, you know, like big energy, friendly kind of stuff. And anyone who had eyes on him coming up the stairs knew that was an act. And it just took any kind of credibility away from any of the motivational, inspirational stuff he was saying, because it's like, well, that's not a true reflection. So anyway, I don't know how we got to that one, but yeah.
No, well, I've seen you on stage, I've seen you backstage, and you're exactly the same. So we know that that's not an act with you. That is exactly what you get with you. But you've hosted the global conference in Hawaii. I watched you there. You were fantastic doing that. Where do you go from there? What are your goals in terms of public speaking, in terms of performance?
An absolute honor. I did not expect to be the MC in Hawaii because Rita and I had done it the year before.
And she was brilliant as well, I have to say. She was phenomenal.
So Rita had done it for 3 years in a row. She was in Singapore as MC, and she did. She had Jonathan as a partner on day one, then Russ and Jill Sorden on day two, and then Russ and Jill did day 3 and 4. Then Rita and I did it in Madrid and Hawaii. So I wasn't at all expected to do it for the second year in Hawaii. I'm definitely not doing it this year in Sydney because I know who the MCs are and I could not be happier for them.
Yeah, who is it?
I can't tell you because, well, I could tell you because this airs after the recording, so it's already happened.
But you can't tell me. Yeah, okay. Fine.
But yeah. So, you know, with Doctor Who time travel, it's you know, I don't want to be in breach of contract.
Timey-wimey stuff. Fine.
Timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly stuff. Yeah. It's a weird thing. I don't set goals in terms of public speaking. I've been very lucky now to do every slot on the main stage at National. So I've opened day 1 and 2. I've closed day 1 and 2. I've closed a members day. I've opened a members day. In terms of global, I've spoken at global in a breakout. I've been asked to do a roundtable this year, which again is a huge honor. I've emceed. I never lose track of the reason why I get those opportunities, because it doesn't matter how good a public speaker you are in BNI. If you haven't got results to back it up, you're not going to be on those stages. So my focus is always on the success of my members. we never go after awards. We never go after accolades. So our regional saying is you do the right things for the right reasons and the world catches up. So we always look at what's right for the members. What can we do? We've just rolled out our 5-year vision for the region. And it's achievable. So it's scary, but achievable. Achievable. Yeah. I like making up words. And when we achieve that, and the date to achieve that is the 9th of May, 2030. So my 51st birthday. When we achieve that, I'm sure there will be other speaking opportunities that come as a result of doing that. But right at the core of doing that are 25 local charities being supported by 1,025 members. So, that's the reason why we're doing it. Anything else that happens alongside, anything that happens to me, any glassware that we pick up, any speaker opportunities that come to my team, myself, my members, is a side effect of doing the right things for those people in BNI in the region. So I would never ever put a target on where my next speaker gig would come from, because that's not what it is for me. It's not, public speaking is not a career for me. It's a beautiful side effect of the position that I am privileged to be in. And I describe my role as the best job in the world. And it's not like I'm rescuing kittens and generating rainbows. It's the best job in the world because every day it's different, because I'm dealing with people. So we run exactly the same agenda in 11,500 chapters all over the world, but you'll never go to one that's the same.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with people. And that's, there's a wonderful business coach in my region who talks about flow. So your ability meeting the challenge perfectly. And that's how I feel about my BNI role. It challenges me regularly, and I have to constantly keep my ability topped up and improving to be able to meet that challenge. And that's why it's the best job in the world, because it's interesting, it's engaging. And ultimately the outcome of this role is that people are successful. We change lives. There are people in BNI, I'm sure you know many, that wouldn't be here if it wasn't for BNI, wouldn't be in business. There are people who have confided with me that they don't even know if they would be on this planet without the support that they've had from BNI.
I know one of them. And
that it is incredibly powerful. So where do I go next? Wherever I'm asked to go is the honest answer. And I probably say yes a little too often, but one day it's all going to stop. And I recognize that, yes, I have my own personality. I have my own skill set, and BNI wouldn't, if for any reason BNI and I parted company, I would still exist and still be me and still go and do lovely stuff. However, right now, I only get the opportunity to do what I do because I'm supporting wonderful members in Southeast London.
Wow. We've got a few moments left. It's flown by, hasn't it? It's flown by.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to ask you quickly about, I know you've done 2 podcasts with Ivan Meisner on the official BNI podcast, is the 100 Point Club.
Yeah.
What prompted you to set that up, and why? What's your purpose with doing it?
So I always say I don't have any original thought. Anything that I do successfully, I stand on the shoulders of giants, and I'm quite good at innovating. So taking an idea and just kind of refining and putting twists on it. And so the 100 Point Club came about from our very first high class 100 hero, of which you are one. You are one of the accolade winners from our event. A guy
I
called
wasn't
Russell,
going to mention it, Greg, but thank you.
and well deserved. You know, like what you give back to the BNI community with your podcasts and your channels are very profound. I mean, one of your podcasts was shared on one of my chapters groups just today. It made me smile.
Was it?
So you know, that's the kind of thing that we need to recognize, this additional impact that people have. And it was our very first award winner from our very first event, Russell Frost. He said to me one day, what are we doing for 100-point members? So the 100-point pin, which I've been told by Global Store is the most popular pin that they produce now. I designed that initially and had them commissioned because I was like, okay, when one of my chapters became UK and Ireland's #1 for the very first time in my journey, I phoned up the national directors. I'm like, they're #1. And they're like, yeah, well done. What do they get? What do you mean, what do they get? Well, you know, is there a trophy? Is there a rosette? Is there a social media shout out? What do they get? Nothing. So I commissioned a trophy every time one of my chapters, you know, and it cost me over £100 each time. It's a nice bit of glassware. And I had a chapter recently that was #1 for 13 times out of 15 months. And
wow.
So my colleagues are like, well, why are you doing that? Because we should celebrate this stuff, right? Yeah. There are 500 groups in the UK and Ireland, and this is the #1 group. It doesn't happen. In some regions, it's never happened.
One of the core values is recognition.
Right. So, and that's that. It was with that sentiment that Russell came to me. He's like, you know, essentially what we're doing here with 100-point members, we are celebrating the amount that they give. So they give a ton of referrals. They give back to the chapter by bringing visitors. You know, they're giving their time by doing one-to-ones, by upskilling their sales with CEUs. They are ultimate givers. That doesn't actually mean they're earning. It does give them a better chance of earning, but it doesn't guarantee. So he just said to me, wouldn't it be great if there was something for 100-point members? So we did the 100-point club, and it's a national event. It's online. And it was to give back to, I think the strap line I came up with for it was to help the givers gain. And it is just that. And there's one 100-point member in my region that absolutely, whenever I think of that, screams in my head. They are prolific givers. They have visitors there. They're passing, you know, I think on a bad week, they're doing 6 referrals a week. They are incredible, but they're in a profession where they need a lot of volume of referrals because their product is relatively low cost. So they need high volume, and they don't always get the support that they should. And I'm luckily they're non-geographic, so they can deal nationally. And they're the kind of people that I think about when I talk about the 100-point club. It's okay, well, they're the kind of people that if they leave, the chapter would miss their contribution, but maybe hadn't put 2 and 2 together that they weren't getting back anywhere close to what they contributed.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things I always do whenever I hand out a millionaire giver pin, or, you know, I've got one guy in my region who's now on these £4 million giver pins. And whenever I do it, I always say, the best way of getting on a prolific referrer's radar is to find them a referral.
Yeah.
Because in some instances, like this guy is a property agent, an incredible property agent, and he's very much got the view that, you know, when I put great tradespeople into my properties, it makes me look good, because no one wants to pay rent to a landlord, to a property agent, and a landlord doesn't want to have commission taken off their rent to that property agent. However, when I put great people in front of my tenants, my landlords, they make me look good. And then they go on to say, but it would be nice if I had a few more referrals. So like for him, and his wife are a husband and wife team. I got one of his specific referrals and I cold called them. And I got them a referral which is worth, I think it's about 16 grand a year ongoing, and they've had it for about 5 years now. But the sheer amount of gratitude that someone had actually taken the next step and just put a bit of effort in is incredible. And that's what the 100 Point Club is. It's just a little bit of effort to say thank you to amazing people. That's all it is.
Well, I've been on every single one so far, but I've not yet qualified for the next one.
I'm sure you will.
Need a lot of visitors in the next, was it 7 or 8 weeks? So we'll see how it goes. So that's it, Greg. We're out of time. Thank you very much for that. One final question would be, anyone listening to this thinking, I love the sound of Greg. I really love this. What did you describe yourself? A budget priced Dale Winton.
Yeah.
If anyone wants a budget priced Dale Winton to speak at one of their events, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
So just drop me an email, probably is the best thing. Which if I send that to, can you do a little?
I can pop the email in the description if you want for this, so people can scroll down and see it and go, that's how I get in touch with Greg, and they can just click on that and gosh,
I mean, you can find me on social media. It's Greg Davies-Polaine, and I look like me, so it's quite easy. LinkedIn and Facebook.
You're easy to find.
I'm relatively easy to find. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. So, Greg, thank you very much for appearing on the podcast. I've loved talking to you. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Darren.